I hope that makes sense. And as you'll see, we'll go through a bit of an introduction, and I do also need to make a bit of a disclaimer. We will sort of talk about the scheme and about retrofit as we know it, but the scheme is not actually yet finalized. So this is what we know, but there may be changes. So well worth doing some more research after this. I'll just talk a bit about the context for what we're doing and the basics of effective home upgrades, and then we'll move on to the grant. So I think we'll just make a start. Putting this one extra person in. So apologies for the binging. For next time, I will try and work out if there's a way to stop that in a meeting. And first of all then, a bit of an introduction. So my name is Ivana, and I'm one of the founding members of York Community Energy. And from my day job, you may also know me from, say, NICS, which is York Centre for Nature and Green Living. So both my hobby and work are about sustainability. And on the call tonight, I've got Johnny Stockeld, who will be taking you through the grants details, and hopefully Andy Walker should be joining us later to answer some of the more technical questions. And there's a few other YC members on the call as well who might jump in, hopefully. Yes, if Andy doesn't turn up, then maybe Maria, I might have to pass over to you. But let's not scare you just yet. So so my colleagues will be keeping an eye on the chat, and we are all volunteers. So Your Community Energy is a volunteer-run charity. We set up in 2015 because we were all people who are concerned about climate change and what we can do about it. So from the then York in Transition movement, we started York Community Energy. We now have more than 100 members, I believe, and our purpose is to promote community energy. So that's energy that's controlled by the community, by people, and that's from saving it, which is what we will be talking about tonight, but also generating it renewably. But we'll talk about that another time. The Warmer Homes project, which we started, is our answer to, or how we're trying to deal with the issue of saving energy. And we know that around 36% of carbon emissions in York actually come from housing, and that only around, funnily enough, 36% of York homes are classed as well insulated. And we know that plenty of those could probably be insulated much better than they currently are. We believe that retrofitting of homes is crucial to achieving emissions targets, and that people actually need support to make that happen. So our aim is to get more York homes insulated and help kickstart a market for home retrofits in the city. Oops. Just to provide a bit of context, which I'm sure plenty of you will be aware of, housing accounts for around 30% of UK's energy consumption, whilst domestic heating contributes about 20% of all carbon emissions. And those figures matter because UK homes are amongst the least energy efficient in Western Europe. Properly insulating them and refurbishing them would make a significant contribution to overall carbon reductions, and at the same time help reduce or eliminate fuel poverty, improve well-being and health, and create new jobs. We think that retrofitting is a win-win situation if it is done well. Now, experts say that, and have been doing so for quite some time, that 25 million homes, that is more than one home every minute, will need to be refurbished in the UK between now and 2050. By then, the UK aims to be net zero carbon, but plenty of scientists argue that we actually need to go down to zero long before that in order to achieve no more than 1.5 degree of global warming. Currently, we don't have the skilled workforce or enough awareness of retrofitting benefits needed to achieve this. So if York is serious about going carbon neutral by 2030, after declaring climate emergency last year, housing definitely needs to be a major part of any plans to achieve that. As a group, we've been inspired by the people-powered retrofit project of Manchester-based Carbon Co-op, and we have been drawing on their expertise, including for this presentation. They are well worth checking out as an organization, and I don't say that just because I happen to be one of the trustees. Now, that's a bit about us, and if it's okay, now we'd like to know a bit about you and yeah, who's with us tonight and what your sort of knowledge of the topic is, whether I could maybe just hand over to someone to do the presentation instead of me. So here's a little poll. Oh, you've been filling the polls in already. I didn't realize it had been going. So if you could let us know, that would be brilliant. Can everyone see the poll? Can I have some
Poll
knowledge?
came up for me at the start of the meeting, so possibly
Ah.
everyone's already filled it out.
Okay. Oh, the joys
so
of
we
Zoom.
can get to the results straight away.
Brilliant. Well, let's see then. Okay.
I can't see the poll, Ivana.
Oh, sorry. I've just ended it, so never mind. We'll just, I'll just share the results so that we don't spend too long on this. So from this, we can see that most of your household is interested in doing something. Good, we've got some landlords there, some council officers and community energy group. Not too many people that are not from York, so that's nice. And we've got a good split of beginner and intermediate, so that's good. Because it means that hopefully there will be something new for you, and yeah. So thank you for that. Now, has it disappeared? I'd better check. Has the poll gone? Yep. Jolly good.
Yep.
So thank you for doing that. It's good to know sort of who's in the room. And now also I'll just take you through very brief. Well, I'll try and be brief. Please, Johnny, do kind of indicate if I'm just carrying on too much. About the sort of basics. So, you know, why we need to think about home upgrades, why it's not just about ordering some insulation and seeing what happens. So why do we retrofit? Well, a good house, what should it do? It should provide comfortable shelter without costing the earth. It should keep us dry and warm in the winter, cool in the summer, without needing to use lots of energy to achieve it. It also needs to be resilient to extreme weather conditions and events driven by climate change, such as flooding or high winds. Most importantly, it needs to keep us healthy by providing good indoor air quality alongside thermal comfort. Now, it is much easier to build homes like this from scratch using a high standard such as passive house. The picture in the house in the picture is a your local passive house plus, which actually generates more energy than that the inhabitants need, and the temperatures inside never ever go below, I think, 17 or 18 degrees, and they can be definitely much warmer than that. Unfortunately, most of us live in houses that have stood for decades, if not centuries, and will be standing in 2050 when the UK is supposed to be carbon neutral. So how we bring them up to the standard needed to both tackle climate change and improve people's well-being is what we will talk about next. So what is retrofitting? It's basically making improvements to an existing structure, in this case a house, and each house leaks heat at different rates from different components. Now, we could just retrofit by fitting new technologies on, such as renewables and energy smart systems, to just provide the energy we need. But as YC, we believe that ideally, we should adopt the fabric first approach. So reduce the energy needs, reduce the heat losses and energy losses in the first place. And we'll look at the different ways to achieve it shortly, but it's also worth mentioning that the first step of any retrofitting should be making sure that basic repairs and maintenance are done. Fitting lots of insulation to a wall that's getting wet from a leaky gutter could lead to serious problems such as mold. So maintenance comes even first to make sure that the fabric's good. So let's look at the first things that springs to mind when we think about energy efficiency home upgrades. It's probably going to be insulation. And if you think of insulation as a winter coat for your home, you choose the one that's suitable for where you are, for the climatic and local conditions. So for example, in a relatively dry York, you will be able to consider a wider range of insulation and wall finishes than in rain-swept Scotland. Without going into too much detail, each house component and insulation material has a U value. Now, this indicates the rate at which heat flows or is wasted through a material. So the lower, the better. And for example, a typical uninsulated suspended timber ground floor has a U value of around 3.3 watts per square meter Kelvin, while a properly insulated one will have a U value of 0.15 or less. Now, these figures may not sound like huge or important, but insulating a floor like that, which we've done during our housewarming party, has improved its value by around 20 times. And in so doing, has increased the thermal comfort in the room. And I'm sitting on that floor right now. And I just realized I think I somehow skipped through one slide, but never mind. You would have known what what housewarming party is if I had gone through it, but never mind. Now, most of the insulation costs are in labor. So we would definitely say, whenever you can, go beyond building regulations, which set the minimum rather than the best requirements and standards, and super insulate. If you can, put more on, because that you will get the sort of best values. And mind the gap. Make sure that it is continuous. If it is not, then you will be losing heat, and it may lead to problems with condensation and mold, which can cause health issues and could lead to even worse. Just to illustrate this, this is a recently refurbished house, I believe in New Iswick or Hexby, that we visited with our thermal imaging camera. And you can clearly see from the difference in the colors, you can see that dark blue cold spot where clearly insulation is missing in that nicely decorated corner of the kitchen, which will be losing a lot of heat and energy. So it needs to be continuous. Speaking of gaps, airtightness is another hallmark of good retrofitting. It may not sound like a desirable quality for a good home, but it's actually incredibly important. It basically means removing any uncontrollable airflows caused by gaps and cracks in the building fabric. So that's your walls, roof, floors, and other structural parts. Draft proofing, which fills gaps around poorly fitted fixtures like doors, windows, or loft hatches, which is the image here, that's a leaky loft hatch, which could do with some draft proofing. It's a very good start, and we'll be running a workshop on draft proofing in the near future. But it is not enough to plug the whole gaping hole. You really need good insulation. Just to help you visualize the scale of the problem, imagine this. Imagine if you could combine all of the drafts and all the sort of gaps and cracks in your house into one hole in a wall. So this is something I learned from the Building Sustainability podcast that you will get a link for, and that's worth listening to. So in a house that's built to building regulation standard, that hole, so combining all of those gaps and drafts, would be the size of a cash machine. Now, to me, that sounds like a very big thing to have in a room in your house. And that cash machine in this case is actually working in reverse. You're feeding it money rather than getting money out, because you're paying high energy bills and costing the earth through increased carbon emissions, Or if you can't afford it, you live in a very cold home because you might not be able to afford to waste money like this. By comparison, a passive house will be, the whole will be the size of a credit card. And that's a thing just to visualize sort of what sort of scale we are talking about here. I think it's a very powerful way to look at that. But while you're busy removing drafts and wrapping up your house, you do need to think about keeping a healthy indoor air quality with ventilation. So we often worry about outdoor air pollution, which is definitely worth worrying about, but we actually spend up to 90% or more time indoors. And for our well-being and health, it is crucial to have good fresh air supply. The tricky bit is balancing the benefits of incoming fresh air with keeping your precious heat. And there are various ways of achieving that with different types of ventilation, starting from the simple opening of windows or trickle vents to humidity regulated vents, or the advanced mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, where incoming air is warmed by outgoing stale air. Those systems also filter the air, so they are particularly well suited for people with respiratory conditions. And the picture, which you may be puzzling over, is actually, that's filters from a York passive house, a different one to the one pictured earlier. And you might be able to guess which one is the one that was taken out after a few months of filtering the outside air to bring in fresh air into the house. So ventilation and sort of, good air is very important. The higher you aim on airtightness and insulation, the more you need to plan for good, reliable ventilation. So that maximum seal and insulate tight, ventilate right is really, really important. Ventilation also has the all-important role of controlling moisture levels, because too much moisture creates ideal conditions for molds and fungi to grow, while too little is great for viruses, which is particularly pertinent today. Happily, maintaining optimum moisture levels for humans eliminates the indoor pollution risks and helps protect the house fabric. To sum it up, each house is unique. We all live and use our houses in different ways. There may be two houses that look the same on the same street, but they will be used differently. There will be different things that people have done to them. So each needs to be approached with a sort of fresh set of eyes. Doing just one thing, because all of those sort of ventilation and insulation and sort of airtightness, all of those sort of work together or against each other. You need to balance them. So if you do just one thing, it may cause problems elsewhere. So we would really advise that you have a whole house plan so that you can make sure that what you do now will not make the house worse in the future, or will not make your life worse in the future. If done well, this will benefit you with increased comfort and improved health, and also save on energy bills whilst properly reducing carbon emissions. But in some cases, if people have been living in very cold houses, then actually, if they haven't been able to afford to pay their bills, it may be that their carbon emissions will rise, but at least they will have a decent house at the end of a retrofitting journey, which is what we want to achieve. So I would say try and get a plan for your house, work out what your ambitions are, what you want to achieve from the house, and then talk to installers, talk to contractors, ask them about U values and what sort of performance they expect, how they will deal with moisture and airtightness, what their plan is. Ask lots of questions and ideally get some independent advice. So that's a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour of the basics of retrofitting. I'm no expert by any means, but this is sort of what I've learned so far, and we will have Andy responding to kind of more technical questions. Now, just one before I'll hand you over to Johnny. I just thought it'd be worth actually finding out what sort of motivations and ambitions there are for retrofitting. So I'll see if I can share another quick poll. And if you wouldn't mind filling that in, just so to give us an idea of what sort of energy efficiency improvements you want to make and how far you want to go with those. I'll just give it another minute. This is brilliant. It's good to see that most people have more than one ambition. Okay, I think the majority of people have voted, so I will stop the poll now and share the results so you can see. So it's brilliant to see that lots of people are motivated by reducing carbon emissions, because that is really what we want to achieve. But health, comfort, and saving a bit of money is also important. So that's good to know. And it's really good to see that lots of people actually want to go as far as possible with retrofitting. So you really need to be watching out for quality and making sure that all work is done to the best standard. Thank you very much. That's very useful. So now I'll hand over to Johnny. Hopefully the poll has gone.
Looks like it. Great, thanks, Anna. Hi, I'm Johnny Stokeld. Real good, yeah. I'm Johnny Stokeld. I'm a member of York Community Energy. I work as a low carbon energy consultant for my day job, so I have some familiarity with this, although yeah, nowhere near the expertise level of Andy. So yeah, Andy's expertise in the chat so far already very, very helpful. And if you do have any questions, we'll be looking to answer those some more at the end as well. So I'm just going to provide a bit more detail about the Green Homes grants now. Yeah, get into the details of what's involved. So yeah, the Green Homes grants are a government scheme providing vouchers to fund home upgrades with insulation and low carbon heating, as well as a few supporting measures as well. It's been created, I guess, in order to try and help the economy recover from the lockdown and the restrictions associated with COVID-19. And it's particularly good for that because it's quite labour intensive, which means it's good for generating jobs, and it can be delivered quite fast as well. But obviously very important too that it actually helps with improving home energy efficiency, helping people have warmer homes, and helping to reduce carbon emissions as well. And just to note that this is just eligible for people within England. Hopefully that's fine with everyone on this call. I'm assuming it will be mostly York-based people on the call, but yeah, just a note there. So the main point is that it's £5,000 is available as a voucher to cover up to 2/3 of the total cost of energy efficiency or low carbon heating measures. So if you are a low income household, that's then up to £10,000, and that will cover up to 100% of the total cost, rather than the 2/3. And so yeah, there's 1.5 billion available. In order to be eligible, you need to be a homeowner or a landlord. So if you're renting, then you would need to ask your landlord to put the measures in instead. And the contractors that need to be used, they have to be accredited. So If it's insulation or an efficiency measure, then Trustmark is the body that deals with the accreditation for that. And if it's low carbon heating, then that's dealt with by the microgeneration certification scheme. It's meant to be open from the end of September 2020. We are, of course, very close to the end of September 2020 and still awaiting final details, as Ivana mentioned earlier. But yeah, I think it should be launching relatively soon, and it will be approximately 6 months in length, ending on the 31st of March, as far as the current information is saying. Just another couple of notes on this. One is that to be counted as a low income household, as I mentioned in one of these bullets, that's identified by receipt of benefits such as income support, job seekers allowance, or universal credit. And if you're a landlord, then you wouldn't be eligible for the low income part. You'd just be eligible for the up to 5,000 and up to 2/3 of the total cost. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is how you apply for the grant. So applications are done through the Simple Energy Advice website, which is a government endorsed advice website, simpleenergyadvice.org.uk. And in the top right of the screen there, you can see what the landing page looks like, and there's a green box in the top right of that screenshot that says Green Homes Grants, and if you click through to there, you get information about the grants, and then you can click through to complete the eligibility survey, which is the first part of applying. You can complete this short eligibility survey to find measures that you can apply for. I'd recommend you do that, just regardless, really. It's useful just to find out what you're likely to be eligible for. We've got a screenshot in the bottom right here that shows how that works. So you'll be asked questions like, how old is your home? And you answer within these brackets. The next step is that you can build a plan once you've found what measures you can apply for. So select the measures you're interested in, and then find accredited contractors within that site. So you don't need to worry about the certification. It's all just provided within the website. It'll also provide you a bit more information on how to tell if a measure is appropriate for your home. And then you can request quotes from those contractors, and you need to have at least 3 quotes for a certain measure in order to be eligible for a voucher. So those are the 3 things you can do now if you choose to. As Ivana mentioned earlier, it may be helpful to get an energy survey and a whole house plan as well. But then in terms of applying for the voucher, that'll be once the scheme is officially launched. You'll be able to apply for the voucher also through this website. And once your voucher has been confirmed, you can commission work, but only once your voucher has been confirmed. And you need to make sure that the work is done by 31st of March 2021 in order to be eligible. Great, next slide, please. So the way that this is structured is in terms of primary measures and secondary measures. This is how the Green Homes Grant has been set out. So we'll go into a bit more detail on those in following slides, but first, this is a list of what count as primary measures. You need to have at least one primary measure, or you need to be applying for at least one primary measure in order to be able to claim money for the secondary measures as well. So you can't have a secondary measure on its own. You have to have at least one primary measure in order to be able to apply for any secondary measures. So the primary measures cover solid wall insulation, either external or internal, cavity wall insulation, underfloor insulation, and then insulating a loft, flat roof, a room in a roof, or insulating a park home. And top-ups of insulation are allowed, but not replacements. And then on the low carbon heat side, you can have an air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, solar thermal, or a biomass boiler is covered by that. Generally, it's always a good idea to have got the insulation right before you look to low carbon heat, because it's important to save energy first before you then start looking at different ways of generating it, and it will mean that you can size the unit more effectively, and it's generally a more cost-effective solution. Okay, so next slide. So the secondary measures that are covered, so there are things like draft proofing, double or triple glazing, where that's replacing single glazing, or similarly inserting secondary glazing in addition to single glazing. You can also have energy efficient replacement doors. And then there's also things like hot water tank thermostats and insulation and heating controls, all included within secondary measures. So these are the measures that you need to have had a primary measure in order to be eligible for. Next slide. So there is also going to be some supporting work eligible for money as part of the Green Homes grants as well. So that includes things like, well, you can see there's a list here, things like new tanks and pipe work, various bits of modelling, damp treatment, repairs, improving controlled ventilation. But they must all be in support of a primary or secondary measure. So again, fundamentally, you need to have at least one primary measure before you can look at these other things. And the modelling will be particularly relevant for certain measures such as internal and external insulation, as well as heat pumps. These are the sorts of things that are more likely to require design and assessment work. Okay, so a bit more on the next slide, a bit more information about how the money works. So as I said before, assuming that if you're not a low income household and you're just applying for the up to £5,000, then the government voucher will provide 2/3 of the quoted cost up to £5,000. So then the homeowner provides the remaining third. And then if you think about that in terms of primary measures and secondary measures, the value of the voucher that's going towards secondary measures can't exceed the value of a voucher going to primary measures. So if you're spending more on secondary measures than primary measures, you might have to top up the secondary measures yourself. We'll do a worked example if we go to the next slide, which might help make this a bit clearer as well. So in our first example, if we consider that you've decided to install an air source heat pump costing £7,200, as well as a secondary measure of a replacement door at £800. So your secondary measure is costing less than your primary measure, so you're allowed to claim for all of that. Or at least, there's no restriction there. 7,200 plus 800 is £8,000, 2/3 of which is about £5,300. So it's more than your upper limit of £5,000, which means you get the upper limit of £5,000. So the government will pay £5,000 in this example, and you then need to pay the remaining £3,000, taking it up to £8,000 in total, which is the total cost. If you're on low income, of course, then you are eligible for up to £10,000 and 100%, so you wouldn't actually have to pay anything yourself. In the second example, if you were to install cavity wall insulation, for example, costing, say, £900, and you also wanted to upgrade all your windows to double glazing at a cost of £5,000, in this case, your secondary measure is more money than your primary measure, and so the amount that's eligible for the grant is capped at the same value as the primary measure. So you get £900 is eligible with the primary measure, plus £900 is eligible with the secondary measure. That's £1,800 eligible. Government pays you 2/3 of that £1,800. That's 1,200, and you pay the remaining 4,700, and that's 5,900 in total. And so there's a couple of examples. So the main things to remember are it's 2/3 of the total up to a maximum of 5,000, and the secondary can't exceed the primary. This is as we understand it now. More terms and conditions will probably be unveiled in the coming days or possibly weeks, which might clarify some of the uncertainties that are still remaining. So if we go on to the next slide, I will try and give a quick overview of some of the different measures. Well, yeah, I've covered the measures that are eligible for the grants and the sorts of things that you might want to consider if you're looking at installing these. Obviously, there is quite a lot to consider, so I probably won't be able to cover it all extremely thoroughly, but if you do have questions, then feel free to put them in the chat. So looking at solid wall insulation first. So this is most likely to be the best option for a house that doesn't have cavity walls, and so wouldn't be able to have cavity wall insulation. So you can have either internal or external wall insulation. Both involve adding a layer of a highly insulating material to the walls, and both have pros and cons, but both are very high impact and can also be very expensive, and will require specialist input on the design and specification. With internal walls insulation, it is very disruptive, and you will lose some space because you're putting insulation inside, although it's only the external walls, so it might not be as much as you think. And things like putting nails into walls suddenly require a lot more consideration as well. With external wall insulation, you need to be careful of things like the roof line and the external detailing and the pipes, to make sure that that all fits together correctly. And in particular, you need to make sure that there's no water running into the insulation and penetrating into the house. Both can be fiddly, and both have been done badly in the past in previous government funded schemes. But if you get a proper survey and proper modelling and a good contractor, then there's no reason not to go for one of these. So moving on to the next slide. So cavity wall insulation. So this is about filling an existing cavity with something like mineral wool, polystyrene beads, or polyurethane foam to provide insulation. It's relatively quick and not too disruptive. There has been a fair amount of pool work around the UK, but if done right, it's again, can be very effective. It's not suitable for all locations, or at least certainly in places where you're exposed to a lot of driving wind and rain. There can be risks of damp bridging. You'll see on this map in the bottom right that York scores, I think, maybe sheltered or moderate on this scale, which means that it's not at a high risk from water penetration into the walls or damp bridging, which is good for this location. The sorts of risks that you can get with this are if the cavity is unsuitable, if it's too small, or if it's partly filled with debris. So it does need, again, a good survey, and ideally doing a thermal imaging camera survey afterwards to check that it's all working as expected. York Community Energy has a thermal imaging camera and is very happy to loan it out to people. So bear that in mind if you do go for this. Moving on to the next one. So underfloor insulation. So this can either be under a solid floor or a suspended timber floor. This can be quite messy and disruptive, but has a very high impact on comfort, especially because it's the thing that your feet are in contact with throughout the day. And so a warm floor will make you feel a lot more comfortable than a warm any other part of a room. The grants should easily cover the cost, but it's also quite possible to DIY this. That was what Ivana mentioned earlier about having a housewarming party where you get input from an experienced installer, and such as Andy Walker, and a group come round and install it all together over the course of a day or two. And yeah, Ivana's had that done in her house, and I think very, very pleased with the results. Great. Okay, moving on to the next slides. So loft insulation is also eligible. Again, that's top up, but not replacement. So you can have insulation of your loft, or of a room in a roof, or of a flat roof. That can either be sort of warm roof, i.e. insulation on top, or cold roof, i.e. insulation underneath. Quite a lot of this has been done in the past, but with varying quality. So again, it's important to try and make sure that you've got good quality, and that's the sort of thing that we at York Community Energy are very keen to support. Moving on to the next slide, please. So those previous primary measures were all on the insulation efficiency side. So if you're looking to put in a low carbon heating system instead, or as well, even better, then heat pumps are a very good one for this. So air source heat pumps will draw in heat from the air. So the way a heat pump works is basically sort of a reverse fridge is how it's often described. So it's using 1 unit of electricity to pull in another 1 or 2 or 3 units of heat from the surroundings, so that the amount of heat that you're getting into your house is more than the amount of energy that you're using from the grid, because it's also pulling it in from the surroundings. So air source heat pumps pull heat in from the air, ground source heat pumps pull it out of the ground, but that means that you need a fair amount of land outside your house to be able to put pipes down. These are only really practical if your house is well insulated. They put out lower temperature heat than, say, a gas boiler. And so that's why that's one of the main reasons that having good insulation is important. And similarly, it might be necessary to have new radiators, like larger radiators, or underfloor heating, basically so that the heat output is as good, even though the temperature is lower. And having a tank for hot water heating can be important. The Green Homes grant covers all of these, which is great. If you want to find out anything more about these, then check out the Carbon Co-op's Heat Pumps for Beginners short course as well. So moving on to the next slide. So solar thermal. So this involves putting vacuum tubes on your roof and transferring heat into a tank. Because solar generally gives you the most energy during the summer, it's not especially useful for space heating, heating up the rooms of your house, because there isn't very much output at that time of year. But it can be useful for meeting some of your hot water. Usually it'll only supply around 40 to 60% of your hot water, so you may need other technologies as well. It can also be more problem prone than PV, so often solar PV generating electricity will be a better solution, but this is definitely one that's worth considering as well. Moving on to the next slides. So biomass boilers as well. So these can be quite expensive. I guess the main thing about biomass boilers to flag is that their green credentials depend on where the biomass is coming from. It can often be not coming from a sustainable source, in which case it's not actually a very green technology. And certainly if this was to be scaled up to a national level, then producing heat from biomass would be very, very difficult to do in a sustainable way. But can be very useful for certain contexts, and especially in rural contexts. It can have problems with local air pollution as well, which is again why a rural context can be better. So yeah, one to be a bit more wary about. I think we probably prefer heat pumps at York Community Energy, but this is one that's also eligible for the Green Homes grant as well, and definitely worth considering as part of the process of looking at what measures you might want. Next slide, please. So just looking at some of the secondary measures now. So firstly, thinking about windows and doors, there's a little diagram on the right here showing the heat loss through single glazing compared to double and triple glazing. So yeah, if you do have single glazing, then replacing it with double or triple glazing or putting secondary glazing in can be a very good way of reducing the heat loss quite drastically from the windows. Draft proofing can be a very good way of doing quite low cost ways of improving the sort of comfort and the temperature of your house as well. I know that's something that I've done quite a lot of DIY draft proofing in my own flat, and it's made a massive difference. your community energy, we're running, I think we'll be running a draft proofing workshop quite soon to teach you how to do that. That was where I learned, and I found that really, really helpful. So yeah, that's definitely worth doing. However, in the context of doors, it might be better just to put a whole new energy efficient door in place. This will only be eligible for the grant if it's replacing single glazed or solid door installed pre-2002. Next slide, please. So if you haven't already got insulation on your hot water tank or a thermostat on your hot water tank, then that's definitely a good idea. And another one definitely worth considering is heating controls, so that, for example, you can set the temperature, the heating in your bedroom to come on later than the heating in your lounge, for example. It allows you to have a lot more control over which parts of the house are warm at different times, and allows you to use energy much more efficiently. There's quite a few different ways of doing that, so definitely worth looking into, and can be a very low cost way of reducing your energy bills quite drastically. Next slide, please. And now just a quick note on things not covered by the grants. So, I mean, there's a list of those here. And again, this isn't all finalized yet. All the final details of the grants are still to be released, but at the moment it's looking like building an extension or conversion to your home won't be eligible, nor will insulating a conservatory that doesn't have fixed heating in it, nor will installing a new fossil fuel heating system, so gas, oil, or LPG boilers, not covered. If you already have double or triple glazing, then that's not going to be eligible. Solar PV and storage, while very good things to be installing, aren't covered by the Green Homes Grant, because the Green Homes Grant is looking at the heating side of things. And if you start the work before your voucher has been issued, then that won't be covered by the grant as well. So that's one to definitely make sure that you've got your grant before you commission the work to start. So if we move on to the next slide, I think at this point I'm handing back to Ivana.
Thank you, Johnny. So, as you can see, there's a lot to consider, and I just want to, although we've already mentioned some of these, but I want to issue a bit of a sort of government health warning. So one of them is that certainly, unfortunately, some part of the government don't seem to appreciate that retrofitting is somewhat more complicated than providing some free dinners. And there seems to be kind of arguments ongoing between different departments about how to actually make retrofitting happen well on the scale that is needed. And if the householders and the well-being and health are not considered as really fundamental in any retrofitting scheme or measure, then things can and will go wrong. Certain schemes have resulted in some really disastrous consequences, as if you want to, you can look up Preston, the retrofit scheme there, where 7 years on, some people are still living with damp and mold problems in unassailable houses. But some lessons have definitely been learned from those earlier schemes, and all the details of specific terms and conditions are still being finalized, so there may be still more measures coming in, or maybe some taken out. We don't know for sure how the exact sort of terms and conditions, and the scheme administrator, at least as of last week, hadn't been appointed yet. They may have been by now. And the scheme has been somewhat hastily put together in response to COVID, rather than to answer the numerous goals over the last decade to improve British housing and lose the moniker that the UK has of being the cold man of Europe. So unfortunately, the starting date is not quite certain yet either. We only know that it should be the end of September, but we know that at least for now, the end date is very much set for the end of March 2021. And that could be a bit tricky because this sort of short-termist approach is not good for the sector, it's not good for householder confidence. And our concern is that it may lead to potential problems, and it will not lead to the major training and recruitment drive that's required to create green jobs in achieving zero carbon housing at the speed required to address the climate emergency. Also, if there are any delays caused by bad weather or the lack of installers, then contractors may miss out. So it's a good start, but there's definitely things to consider before you apply. Just on the benefits, on the pros, it's free money. It should help us save carbon, reduce bills, and improve comfort. It will very much depend on what's already been done to your house, whether you're eligible or not, on the different measures. So hopefully there is something that you will be able to apply for. Hopefully it will incentivize new training for contractors and help the economy, which is one of the main reasons behind this. And it certainly raised an interest in retrofitting. There's all these people interested. So we definitely don't want to discourage you from applying. But want to highlight the fact that there are also some potential risks or things that are not so good about the scheme. So there's a limited number of accredited contractors. They're much more likely to be larger, not local contractors. And that might potentially lead to delays or even higher charges. We don't know for sure. It's worth mentioning that quality standards are not always a guarantee, especially if there's a rush, if contractors have to finish the job on a tight deadline, because there is a serious shortage in certain skills. The grants may also limit the choice of materials, particularly I think if you're looking for natural materials or have a specific wish, they may not be, you may not be able to use the grant to pay for those. You really need to check the sort of terms and conditions. And once again, the fixed and tight deadline is certainly a bit of a risk. So I'd recommend, before launching into going onto that website to look up what you can do, I would recommend actually sitting down and working out what your priorities are. Is it the carbon savings? Is it improving comfort? How much disruption are you willing to put up with? Because some of those works will definitely disrupt your life. So how much of that are you happy to live with? It will be short-term disruption. My floor took maybe a week properly to sort out, spread over a few months, but that is well worth, the result is well worth doing it. So you just need to have a think about what your what the balance is of the disruption versus the long-term comfort, what your ambitions are before applying for any money, and definitely seek further independent advice rather than just trust the quoting contractors. I guess on that point, just a bit about how we can help. Obviously, for now, we are a group of volunteers supported by experts and kind of experienced people like Andy Walker. So at the moment, we would definitely recommend having a whole house review, be it by Andy Walker or your local retrofit coordinator. Again, unfortunately, there are not that many of them registered yet in the UK. I think you can find them via the Trustmark website. There's not very many of them just yet. Eventually, we hope to have our own retrofit coordinators and assessors to do these assessments and advise. For now, we'll refer you to others. We can also offer a thermal imaging survey. I think I've missed out on the slide that detail this, but yes, we can. When it gets cold enough, we can go around your house or lend you the camera so that you can check on what it's like. We can try and give you feedback on your plans, so we'll do our best to find answers. Where, as I say, we're not experts, but we do link up with some experienced people, so we will do our best to find answers to your questions and sort of provide feedback on your plans. And we also push for a retrofit strategy for York, because we think that there should be a lot more support for homeowners who want to do this. And one way you can help us do this is by filling in a survey where we are asking questions about the sort of work that people want to get done or see done. And we will not share the contact details with anyone, but we will be sharing the results and sort of the overview with the council and with local contractors so that they can see there is interest, that people are keen to get high quality work done in their homes. And then one day, we do hope to be able to recommend local contractors who can go and help make your home warmer, save energy, and reduce carbon footprints. Now, we'll shortly be starting the question and answer session, but before that, I'll just give you a very quick invitation to a few events. Again, we'll be sharing the links at the end or after the event. One thing I'm involved with as part of my day job at St. Nick's is showcasing home retrofitting and good new homes through something called York Open Eco Homes. We just had our first session this year on Zoom last Thursday, and I've just arranged for another one. And I'm particularly excited about this one because I've got a family that have actually had to combine flat proofing with making their homes more energy efficient. And we might actually have someone from the Environment Agency on the day as well, advising on how to get funding for flat proofing work. And our AGM, annual general meeting of York Community Energy, is coming up in October, and I'm excited that we've got Paul Allen from Zero Carbon Britain, the Centre for Alternative Technology, and Andy Boyle of Otley 2030. We will be running a draft proofing workshop at some point, and we've got a couple of events in York Environment Week. So to find out about all of that and to keep up to date with what we're doing, then please sign up to our mailing list. And I would definitely recommend also checking out Carbon Corp for some great workshops and webinars that can help you, again, get some more skills under your belt so that you know what to be asking those contractors when it comes to planning your home retrofit. So now I guess let's go on to our question and answers. So the chat's been very busy, and Tom, I'll bring Tom in now, I think, and maybe stop sharing actually, so that people can maybe see each other if they want to. And I'll hand over to Tom, who's been keeping an eye to start us off.
Yes, okay, thanks for that. Yeah, like you say, it's been quite busy. Some good discussions going on and quite a few sort of questions coming through, people looking for clarifications on the scheme. So for example, we had, so Martin did mention about, he's looked on the website and there don't seem to be many installers in his area, which we did kind of mention in the slides. And yeah, that's just going to be one of the issues with the scheme, is that there's not necessarily lots of people around to do the work. So it can be a challenge. Yeah, I'm not sure there's much more I can say about that really. We had a good few questions from Mike, who I think has just left, unfortunately. So there's a few questions. So do you have to accept the cheapest quotes? Because we mentioned you have to get 3 quotes. I don't specifically know the answer to that, but I presume you can accept whichever quote you want to. And with some of these measures, the devil's in the detail. Someone might quote a price and it's different from somebody else's price, but there might be it might cover more sort of items in the quotes than the other person. So that's one of those things where you just have to really read through the details. What happens if you want, say, if you're going for a heat pump and there's a particular kind that you want? I think really the answer is you just have to sort of find an installer who will do that kind of heat pump and hope that they're covered by the scheme, really. So yeah. What else did we have? Oh yeah, so Mike was saying as well, just be wary of heat pumps being noisy. Obviously, they're a lot quieter these days, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But yeah, beware of noise issues for yourselves and your neighbours. Just make sure you find out in advance how loud they're going to be. But generally, they're all pretty quiet now. We did have a question from James about, can you replace old and damaged loft insulation? And I think it's actually answered in the chat that it's not covered by the scheme. Unfortunately, you can only top up, which is slightly annoying, but there you go. What else did we have? So there was another James who was asking, what's York Council's attitude to external wall insulation on terraced houses? Do they require planning consent? So I don't specifically know what the council's stance is on it. If any councillors are brave enough to talk about it, they're welcome to. But I think in general, there can be, you might need planning permission if you're making sort of cosmetic changes to the outside of a house. So it's probably something to run by the council. I think we do have a few people from the council on the call, but they may or may not want to chime in on that. Have we got?
Tom, it will also depend upon where you live. So if you're living in a conservation area, you're definitely going to need to apply for planning permission. But then it, it sort of depends upon. I'm not sure if it comes into permitted development. If you can build a 3-metre extension back into your garden, then maybe it would. But I guess it depends upon your location.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Sorry, Denise, did you want to say something?
Well, I don't know. Pete didn't come across it. He was sort of coming in and out on my sound, but
yeah.
I think basically what you said is what I would say, that it depends where you are. Obviously, if you're in a conservation area, then you would need to get planning permission. But if you're not, I would have thought you wouldn't necessarily. But we'd have to check it out. It hasn't been tested all that much, really.
I think it's, yeah. Is it one of those things where you can kind of sort of ask the council before you go through the rigmarole of doing an actual planning application? Can you kind of say, do you think I'll need to put in an application for this?
Bit of a sore point that at the moment. We've started charging for pre-application advice, but there would be other ways, like talking to councillors and asking them to ask the question would probably be better.
Okay. So there we go. Thank you for that. Okay, what else did we have? So Ruckmal asked, is loft roof insulation, I presume that's like the rafters insulation, is that covered as well as just the loft floor? And I think, yeah, I didn't know the answer specifically on this, but Andy Walker thinks yes. I think, yeah, because there's room in roof insulation, I think that's covered, isn't it? So that's the general sort of, go on, Andy. We can't hear you if you're speaking, Andy. No, can't hear you. You got your settings right. Shall we come back to you? We might come back to you in a minute. Okay, and the other question there from Ruckmal was, do floodproofing measures qualify? I don't know if anyone actually knows the answer to that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think they qualify here. This is not what the scheme is about, but the Environment Agency, I believe, do have a pot of funding available for homeowners who are likely to be affected. And that's one of the things that we will be talking about in the Open Eco Homes event on 15th of October. But that is not, unless it was maybe part of some enabling work, maybe then it might be covered by this, but I imagine that would have to be determined through a sort of design depending on which measure you go for. So it's unlikely unless it's part of enabling works for this.
Okay. And then there was a question from Martin about double glazing. So she's got really old, poorly functioning double glazing, sort of 27 years old, for example. Can you replace it as part of the scheme? And I believe the answer is no, unfortunately. It has to be, the only windows you can replace are single glazed. Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate, but there you go. What else did we have? Is suspended floor insulation covered? Yep, that is definitely covered. And so Anton says, can a landlord apply for multiple grants? I don't actually know the answer to that. Does anyone else know the answer?
I've had a quick look, and as far as I can tell, it seems that a landlord would be able to apply for multiple grants. When you go through the Simple Energy Advice website, you have to put in details about the house. So I guess you would be having to put details about each house individually and considering it separately. That's my understanding of it, but not 100% sure.
Okay. How are you doing?
And sorry, Adam's just added a comment to the chat there to say that that they think that landlords can apply for each property as well. So that agrees. So that sounds good.
Excellent. Oh yes, and thanks Adam for the comment about using grant money to treat damp prior to insulation. So yeah, if you've got sort of damp joists and that kind of thing, when you pull up your floorboards to do under your floor, then you can use the grant money to treat that first. Andy, how's your sound? Have you managed to sort it out? No? Oh dear. Never mind. Okay. So we did have a comment from Stephen as well, pointing out so you have to be aware of scams out there as well. So there's already websites out there that are sort of purporting to be, you know, a way to get you green homes grant money, but you know these are scam websites basically. So the only place you should be getting the vouchers from is through the Simple Energy Advice website. Was that Andy? Was that Andy saying, can you hear me?
Really badly.
Yeah, we've got a bit of background noise, but we can hear you.
Okay, that's all right then. Hello.
Hi. Did you want to come in on the earlier question?
Yeah, just the question about the roof insulation. Ruckmal was asking about adding insulation to the sloping aspect of a roof in addition to the horizontal. And you really don't need both. That's the point. In designing an insulation system and making a house warm, you've got to define or decide where the boundary is going to be. And the best place to put it is the horizontal surface. It's easy to install. You can use fibrous mineral wool, and it's a smaller surface area as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, did we have any more questions? Have you spotted any other questions, Johnny?
Did you answer the comment around, there was a question from Martin around having had insulation done in the past where there were a lot of gaps and it had to be redone. Did we address that one?
I don't think we covered that one.
So yeah, and it was saying, how do we know, how can we make sure that we don't suffer similar problems with the contractor as part of this scheme? I guess in theory, the fact that there is this Trustmark accreditation scheme should mean that the contractors will be avoiding.
I really, if I can just jump in and say, a really good initial check is just to see if they're wearing a cowboy hat.
Thanks for that, Andy. That's very helpful. Because the other thing is, there's this new system of having retrofit coordinators involved in retrofit projects. who would be experts who can sort of check in regularly on the progress of an insulation project and make sure that it's all being done correctly, and sort of intervene before it's too late. So retrofit coordinators can be a good way of dealing with that as well. Currently, there are not very many of them in the country, so yes, you may have variable success of getting one involved in helping out with the project, but I think they will become more and more important through time.
Currently, there are 140 fully qualified to PAS 2035 in the whole country.
Yeah, so 140 retrofit coordinators in the country is not really enough, which I think is partly why they haven't been mandated for the Green Homes Grant, because there's some talk about retrofit coordinators being mandated to be one of the personnel involved in all of the Green Homes Grant projects. But obviously, with only 140 of these in the whole country, that's not going to be feasible. So which is, I guess, why they didn't go for that in the end. But there should be increasing numbers of those, and they probably will be quite a key part of future schemes.
I think we had a question from Denise as well about what if you've got cavity walls but they're quite narrow and the insulation's not very good. Would you combine external or insulation or internal insulation with cavity walls? Andy, have you got any opinions on that?
Yes, absolutely. Internal wall is the only additional kind of insulation that you can add to cavity wall insulation. This continuing debate or discussion around dew point and condensation within the wall, if you put external wall insulation on, then you are very likely to have condensation within the wall. So you can't do that. You can, however, put internal wall insulation on any house that has got cavity wall insulation. I am convinced that if you make it a proper airtight vapor barrier, there will be no problems with condensation.
Okay. So I'm not sure if there were any other questions that we missed. I think that might be most of them.
I think there was something about underfloor insulation, about cables and wires under floorboards, whether they cause issues. So that might be worth answering. I think maybe I might know the answer now because I've done it in this house. So yes, you definitely need to be careful with pipes and cables. If they go through insulation, they will need to go through conduits to prevent overheating. You need to make sure that they don't sort of overheat and potentially cause fire, or certainly risk it. And pipes, they can be losing lots of heat under your floor, so you definitely want to make sure that if they are not within the actual insulating layers, that you do insulate them as well as you can below it. And if you look, another link that we will be sharing later, I've actually written a blog post about the DIY housewarming party that we've done to insulate the floor that I'm on just now. So I would recommend having a read through that. But basically, yes, you do need to deal with pipes and cables and probably all sorts of other things you will find under the floor, such as rubble and builders' lunch remains and things like that, which will need removing. Yes, Andy might want to add something to that.
Yeah, thank you, Ivana. That's a very comprehensive answer. It's actually easier than you think. The only wires that need to be given an air gap with conduit are the ones that are likely to carry any kind of heavy current. So ring mains, shower cables, cables to cookers, earth wires, telephone wires, TV aerials, absolutely no problem at all. So it's only where it's going through the insulation. Where the wire comes up to the back of an electrical outlet, it's important to stop the airflow through that. I've come across some systems, houses where the air, there's a howling gale blowing out of the electric sockets. because they haven't thought about the airtightness of the cable coming in at the back. The other thing is about pipes. It's absolutely crucial to insulate your pipes, and in fact the closer the pipe is to the central heating boiler, that's where the temperature of the water is the hottest, so it's worth going overboard, as it were, to really cover that in insulation. I mean, what I do is I'll add radiator foil on the outside of the polyethylene tubing to really make sure that you're getting the losses down to a very small level. The second advantage of insulating all your pipes is not only you're not losing heat, but it means that your room will warm up faster because you're delivering the hot water directly to the radiators in the room.
Lovely. So I don't think we had any more questions, or if we did, then I haven't spotted them.
I'm not sure, have we answered the one about flat roof insulation? A cold roof, where the insulation is added under the ceiling or where? I'm not
Yeah,
sure that we had that one.
possibly not.
Andy, might you be able to come in on that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Yeah, so
what are we trying to do?
A flat roof insulation, I think it's currently a cold roof. So where is the insulation layer added? Is it under the ceiling or?
Okay, it depends on the amount of headroom that you've got. The very easy, with flat roofs, it's very unlikely that there's an adequate amount of insulation. The number of flat roofs that I've looked in that's got maybe 50 millimeters of mineral wool, very badly fitted, with gaps around the side, doing almost nothing. The way they design the flat roofs is such that you have a significant airflow coming across it. And this isn't a bad thing because it's going to stop moisture buildup in the timbers themselves. It's all about the headroom and what your design target is. If you want to get if you've got a limited amount of space, then the best solution is to take down the ceiling layer and insulate between the ceiling joists with an amount of rigid board insulation. But if you want to get a better level of insulation, then you additionally overboard on the ceiling surface to give you a bigger depth. I mean, I aim at 150 millimeters of PIR, which is often called Kingspan, and this will get you down to a U value of below 0.15. Then you just have to put a new ceiling layer on. It's all about your design target, and it's all about what appetite you have for disruption and for really reducing the heat losses in your house. Particularly if you're going to live there for a while, I would say it's very, very worth doing.
Lovely. And actually, we have just got another question through in the chat from Adam. And this, I'd like to know the answer to this as well. Has anyone tried to get any quotes from companies yet? Obviously, the scheme hasn't started yet, but it's never too early to ask around and see what people are offering. So I guess this is a question to everyone. Has anyone actually tried to get any quotes yet, or start engaging with installers about this? Or is it a bit early days still, maybe? But yeah, Ivana, yeah.
I think maybe worth saying that actually, because there's such a lack of enough installers, I think if you look for a floor insulation installer in the York postcode area on the Simple Energy Advice, currently I think there are 2, but they are not actually based in York. One was Leeds and one was even further away. But I think it's probably well worth actually trying to get a quote from a local installer, or if you know a builder that you've worked before, or some other contractor, I would try and get a quote for the work you want to do, if only to check that the bigger guys are not trying to overcharge you. And I think the system asks that you get 3 quotes for each measure that you're applying for. but they do need to be done through the system, so that will have to be those accredited installers. But it may well be worth asking some of the non-accredited installers, if you have a good relationship with one, what they would quote, what their targets would be, and just check that actually it might not be better to do without the grant and get someone you can sort of trust and work with locally. I think Andy.
Yeah.
Yes, if I could just jump in on that. And it is all about the targets. And one of the huge problems that we've had with, and I'm going to politely call them traditional builders, is that they like to do what they've always done. But unfortunately, it's always not worked. And you've really got to be ambitious with the design targets. Getting down, and this is super insulation as opposed to UK building regs. It's the only way we're going to get to zero carbon. It's the only way we're going to reduce our bills to really, really small levels. In the last week, I've had conversations with 2 people in York where they've talked about the difficulty they've had with contractors putting in extensions for them. Each of them had asked for extra insulation, and the contractors practically refused. Tom, I mean, would you like to give your experience? I was talking to Natasha and she had a huge problem. Tom, I think you've had a similar experience.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say they refused, but they were very sort of, you know, they basically, a lot of them say things along the lines of, well, you know, building regs are very, very high standards these days. And obviously they have different ideas to us about what counts as high standards. I mean, none of them said that they wouldn't do it, but I'm not sure how much faith I've got in them to, you know, do it right. And I can imagine that there would be some interesting conversations that, you know, when it comes to actual build time. There was one contractor who basically said, "Oh, I don't care, building regs are fine, but I'll do whatever you want. We've done all kinds of crazy insulation things." So, you know, that's a start, I guess. So yeah, so it's a bit of a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah, all I was wanting to say was that there is reluctance and resistance, and I have to say a lack of understanding in the general trade. So what YCE are doing is really good in terms of raising awareness and helping people understand that you've got to go large with insulation and airtightness and ventilation to really get the high quality houses that we need.
We've got Tim with his hand up. Are you wanting to ask a question, Tim?
It wasn't a question, just a point. Somebody asked about getting trust marked vendors. I've got my boss at work who's just installing a heat pump. He's struggling to get 3 trust marked suppliers in the area to come and give him a quote. So although it's possible to get trust marked suppliers, well, it's micro certification for a heat pump, but he's getting cavity wall as well. But he's struggling to get trust marked suppliers. So I think that's going to be a common problem.
Thanks, yeah. I guess they will likely be in very high demand during this scheme, which might make it difficult to get hold of them. I guess possibly one of the benefits, I don't know if it will be possible, but with this survey that we were talking about earlier in the presentation, if there's a lot of people wanting to do insulation and we can show demand through the results of our homeowner survey, then it might be possible to take that to builders in the area and say, look, if you get this accreditation, then there's jobs in it for you. I mean, it will depend on how quickly they can get Trustmark accreditation and how expensive it is and all these considerations. So not a guarantee that it would be possible by March, but it's one thing that we might try.
I think it looks like the questions have now more or less ceased. So I think I don't really want to end on a bad note. So I think it might be worth just sharing that in a few sort of recent workshops I've been to where there were people from BASE, so the business and environment and industry, whatever that stands for.
Business, energy and industrial strategy.
Oh yeah, that department. They are very keen for the scheme to continue beyond March. It's just that they need to have that fight with Treasury and Batten to make sure that actually that will happen. So there is hope that this will not be the end, that this is not just a sort of 6 months or whatever of a mad rush to get some homes insulated with very few installers able to do the work. There will actually be more support for retrofitting later on. If you want to help make sure that that is the case, I think the Climate Coalition at the moment is trying to raise awareness about the fact that there's a spending review happening this autumn. So if you want to join the calls for a proper green recovery, which includes retrofitting and all sorts of other things, I would very much recommend that you join the campaign and call on Rishi Sunak and his colleagues to actually take the issue seriously and help us create a much better country for us all. So I hope you found tonight useful and interesting. Would be lovely to hear some feedback if you want to drop us a line. We hope to see you at the future events, and we'll be sending a follow-up email with the sort of different links that hopefully will be of interest as well. Thank you very much to Andy and Tom and Johnny for helping me to put this together and for providing some expertise. And yeah, hopefully this is a start of a conversation in York in how we retrofit our homes and pull together to achieve that. And we can do some more together. So I'll wish you good night. I think I can smell my dinner. So I'll wish you good night. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and we'll follow up with an email later and hopefully see you again, maybe at our AGM. So thank you. Good night.